Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Today I want to talk about how healing has been in the War Within since we've had time to get near full gear, to be able to experience the full raid, to experience some of the highest levels of Mythic Plus, and a lot of pug healing along the way. So in this video, I want to talk about the three different aspects that sort of make up how healing usually ends up feeling. There is going to be the spec design for how your specific specialization is playing, which can always vary if it's going to be strong or weak, of course. There's the class design where you are thinking about the utility or the defensive power and some of the things that all classes are bringing into the table. And we're going to talk about the encounter design, how they've been adjusting raid fights, Mythic Plus fights, and really updating them for the future. So really quick, if you didn't play in Dragonflight, there were a ridiculous amount of problems across all three of these factors, from having lots of defensive cooldowns on like the class side, which led to the encounter design, over buffing mechanics, dealing way more damage if they were not interrupted, or you didn't have a single mitigation tool up to reduce some of that incoming damage. Things were way spikier. They also had a lot of cooldowns for a variety of healers getting added into the mix, since they're bringing in a lot of like Shadowlands legendaries, putting them into the Dragonflight talents. People had more cooldowns than ever, and it led to a lot of bloat around some cooldowns not feeling as strong, not feeling as powerful. I think Paladin in particular is still a pretty good example of that, where you have a number of different cooldowns that still feel kind of weak. And of course, stamina matters an incredible amount. This is a chart that was made by Tell, and this has been kind of linked to me periodically every expansion, highlighting the health of players and then their average sort of HPS relative to that health pool. What I've said in the past is that healers feel strong or weak depending on how quickly they can push up a health bar. But encounter design plays a big role in that as well, because if you can push up health bars fast, you might have more rot damage or more negative healing absorbs to make up for these sort of things. And so, as you can see, not every fight is going to be perfect. They're sort of meant to be some of the more like rot-oriented, consistent damage sort of encounters. So on Kai'Veza, for example, you have about 2.5 times the health of the max HPS. And so, as you can see on the chart, we're pushing up health pools at around the same pace as we were in both Emir Drasil, Aberrus, Vault of the Incarnates, and as well Sepulchre of the first ones. That was also the peak of like defensive and also healing strength for the end of the expansion. And so usually you'll see a lot of the things in this chart highlighting end of expansion encounters being much higher up on this list, or having a lower number, I guess you could say, whereas other things will sort of slow down. Notably, healing in Blackrock Foundry, Battle for Dazar'alor, Hellfire Citadel was a lot slower, and so it took a lot longer for healers to sort of push up health bars. And so if there's a huge raid-wide hit, it would take the entire raid worth of healers, 10, 15 plus seconds to start fully topping everybody off. The game has absolutely accelerated a lot since then. That being said, I think they've made a lot of good improvements, and I really like how healing has been adapting in the War Within. And with the three different points that they have going on right now, I would say spec design is in a pretty good spot. Obviously, I like how Disc is feeling in a key environment. It's been a little bit rough in raids, but I like how most of the healers have been playing as I've been working on my alt journey. I think that the class design is really where I would focus on like the defensive strength for different specs. And at this point, I think there's still way too much defensive power, which then goes into the encounter design aspect, where I'd actually give them a pretty high rating, like an A or an A minus or something along those lines. Class design, I'd probably give them like a C or something. But encounter design has really adapted well to all the defensive strength that they've been giving to people. As much as I'd wish they'd sort of prune down and reduce the amount of defensive cooldowns everybody has, I don't think people should be having 3 or 4 different sources of defensive strength for them. But that being said, the amount of heal absorbs, the additions of rot damage on a number of different encounters have felt really good on raid fights. And I will say, in a Mythic Plus environment, there's a bit too much of the same type of healing profile, where it's just like burst AoE every single time. It is really fun having some encounters with some like rot damage and some ticking damage, but there's moments where it feels like a little bit too short, like in City of Threads, where you get the splice debuff dealing damage to everybody, and then there's the big stomp, or then there's the weave. It's fun to be healing that steady amount of damage, but it doesn't really last very long. Not everyone's healing experience is going to be the same, of course, with class, spec, and encounter design being wildly different among a few different areas, particularly when you have to be healing in stressful pug environments. To help reduce some of this stress, I like to take advantage of Factor's delicious ready-made meals. Factor's meals are so convenient for me in my daily life whenever I'm falling a little bit behind with my own meal prep, or when I just feel a little bit fatigued of having the same things that I've been cooking over and over again. They have an ever-changing menu with a crazy amount of options that you're able to take advantage of. Quickly have at your door, ordering between 4 and 18 meals a week if you so choose, allowing you to pause whenever you want, have some delays, especially in the holiday season, can be so insanely convenient, and it's a great way to make sure that you're eating right. Personally, from my own weight loss journey back from Shadowlands, the biggest challenge I had when I got started was cooking, and being able to have some extra meals on hand to help weave between some of the times where you don't feel as energetic to really be cooking has helped me a ridiculous amount. So get rid of the hassle of prepping, cooking, and cleaning up, and check out Factor today. Huge thank you to them for sponsoring today's video, and you can use my link in the description down below to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box, and 20% off your next month worth of orders. Huge thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video, and let's continue. So the big changes that Blizzard was making going into the War Within to start making things better started with a huge increase to our total stamina going into the expansion. It was a 60% increase to our total stamina compared to Amirdrasil, ballooning our health into like 6 and 7 million very, very rapidly. And I expect that trend to really only continue as we're going into the expansion. Making health pools higher allows them to sort of slow down damage and to make it a bit less bursty. And a huge factor of the damage being very bursty is both cooldowns on like the class spec design side and defensive cooldowns from the class design perspective. The more defensives that players have access to, the more the encounter designers are tuning damage to be incredibly bursty. And even going back and watching like old footage from prior expansions, it's amazing as to how much more challenging they've made healing overall. Not only are they adding more mechanics than ever before that need to be healed, and not just healing through miss kicks, but still having to do that, but the tank nerfs on top of that, while they haven't made tanks so wholly dependent upon like kiting forever. I've seen some kiting happen here and there. Of course, in my own high key environment, I definitely notice having to heal the tanks a bit more often, especially when I'm in a pug group. You have the additional challenge of trying to push up everyone's health pools quickly in addition to the tanks. And when you're not a healer like Disc, which can heal everybody equally, you know, whenever I'm playing like my shaman or my paladin or even my monk lately, as I've been experimenting with that too, it's very noticeable at times that I need to make sure I have extra focus and extra attention being given to the tank, since those tank nerfs have made them not invincible the way that they were in Dragonflight. They even had an interview going into the new expansion where they were specifically asked about the bloat of defensives, and nothing really seems to be on hand or on deck for them to be making changes, because it basically just involved pruning, and I know a lot of people hate that word with a passion, and they definitely did when a lot of widespread pruning was happening back in Warlords of Draenor. I think that the Dragonflight talent trees give them a really good opportunity to make more choice nodes for not fully getting rid of all of these defensives, but to make you actually have to choose between the situations for when you have access to them. I'm still just surprised they haven't been trying to mix any of those things in, and in some ways they've kind of made it a little bit worse with the hero talents. While I think that they've done a really good job overall, and obviously there's still some dead hero talents for everybody, I think that the way they've added on to the game has been really good and really fun. That being said, a lot of them are also adding more defensive strength, which kind of continues to make the problem a little bit more challenging if they're not constantly buffing up health pools going into every new season. I do expect that to be something they're going to be doing. Notably, they were doing that in the beginning of Dragonflight into Aberrus, and then they opted really not to do it going into Amirdrasil, although the additional eye level that we had was also just ballooning up our stamina on hand. I think that one of the best ways they can do it is to take advantage of that Severed Strands buff that we're now accumulating to make the raid fights easier, and actually make it more about like a health increase, maybe even making it like a damage and a health increase, because it feels like the healers are strong enough. Players just need more time to survive the hit and have the healers get a little bit more breathing room to really push up those health pools. So I hope that that's an area that they start looking at, especially from like a raiding environment. From an M+ environment, while I think that a lot of the boss fights are really fun, I don't know about you guys, but it's so noticeable doing a Shadowlands dungeon versus going into some of the War Within dungeons, where you might go into Mists or Necrotic Wake, and a lot of trash pulls, they'll have a mob like a Throw Flesh mob or a charge from any of the defenders in the Mists maze. They might have like this burst of damage here or like miscasts there, but it's night and day difference between having to fight the regular mobs in War Within dungeons, which are spewing out dots left and right, regular AoE damage onto everybody. It's so much more active healing that you have to do, which can be really fun, but you're also kind of playing on this razor's edge of all of the kicks required in the dungeons. And if something else goes wrong, if somebody else kind of fails in their responsibility, then you're left to pick up the pieces. And it goes from being engaging around unavoidable damage, which feels good, to trying to deal with the avoidable damage, the void zones people step in, the kicks that people miss. And that's where things get really stressful and frustrating, and it's tough to have the agency really to keep everybody alive through those things. Back in Shadowlands, it felt like healers really had to actively be healing in dungeons at lower key levels because just nobody was kicking, and so you could just heal through those missed kicks. And then when you get to higher levels, they would basically just one-shot players, and so the healers went from being the one mitigating and surviving and keeping the team alive through those dots or through those hits going out, to everybody mastering it and everyone stopping those mobs, and then you were just there as an additional DPS player. That has definitely changed going into the War Within. I think they've done a really good job making sure that healers actively have to be healing in those high key environments, but they've only done more to make it more challenging to stop all of the mobs, and the avoidable damage, the damage that you can stop as a team, feels like it's also higher than ever, adding more responsibility into the equation for the entirety of the group, rather than having more unavoidable damage mechanics that the healer is just always going to be preparing for, something akin to some of like the major mini bosses that have to be fought in areas like Dawnbreaker. I think that those are really good to have in a lot of dungeons because it's damage that you can continuously be tuning, iterating upon, and it's going to happen every single time no matter what. And so it's more important to be playing around those mechanics and around that damage rather than having to coordinate and make sure everybody kicks, stops, and interrupts everything before it just destroys somebody. With 1107 right around the corner, they're also going to be adding those rings with sort of the similar Zeskara Vaults vibe to it for some additional power-ups. They also are keeping some of the stats on them. And so this is going to be very interesting to look at because this is also where power creep kind of comes into play, making it so that healers in particular can push up health pools faster, which makes Blizzard accelerate the damage, which makes damage spikier, and then we kind of get back into some of the mix with Dragonflight once again. This is a super major concern that I have going forward, is that if they don't make large-scale changes to like pruning down defensives or making them choice nodes, if they're not keeping stamina high enough over time, or they're not adding like additional stamina to bonus pieces like these rings, for example, and having like extra stamina on top of it so that our health pools are going to continuously increase as we increase in power level, then we're going to be in a position where we have like all kinds of problems. If you played WoW like way back in the day, I'm thinking in areas like Warlords of Draenor or even early Mista Pandaria, classes felt awful when they had like no haste or no stats. Some of them were like more crit bound than others, and it was only like the end of the expansion where you'd actually feel like strong. They've done away with that and so heavily accelerated our secondary stats to make us feel good early, which I think is great. But on the healing side in particular, they need to make sure that they're ballooning up that stamina, because the better we feel, the quicker we push up those health bars, well, then the more bursty damage happens, and then people are just getting wombo comboed left and right. Reactive healing in a lot of cases doesn't exist as much anymore, because even those reactive healers have to be like setting up hots in advance, setting up cooldowns in advance, stacking up resources in advance to like pre-cast spells onto people with the idea that they're going to be getting hit by a mechanic or getting hit by a bolt or something, push up their health pools quick, and then be ready for the next hit that's going to be coming around the corner. You don't have as much time to react as the game accelerates and gets more challenging. With larger stamina pools, then you get a little bit of extra breathing room, and you get a bit more time to think through the casts and what you're utilizing. I haven't dabbled too much into classic Cataclysm, but that was always something I remember both from like getting started playing the game and that watching high-end raiders back then, was you had a lot more decision making for what spell you were going to be casting, because yeah, you needed to push up health pools, but you had some time to be able to make those decisions and sort of drive those decisions. And that is something that I think that a lot of healing doesn't really have too much of these days. It would be interesting to see you get a bit more of that breathing room and a little bit less of that stress, particularly into Mythic Plus, but also I would say into some of like the later heroic fights and even some early Mythic fights as well. But let me know what you guys think, and if you haven't already, make sure you check out our Factor sponsorship. Thanks again for them for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all our patrons for making all this content possible. And thanks to you to watching towards the end. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.